sleaze of international politics, a hive of scum and villainy. And the fact is that I'm not in favor of eminent domain. The UN is a government building. But if President Trump were to declare, for any reason, including corrupt reasons, that the United Nations building ought to be pursued by the Trump Corporation under eminent domain, torn down and replaced with the Trump Tower, I'd be in favor of it. I mean, frankly, if they want to turn it into a nuclear waste depository, I'm in favor of it. You will see why today as we discuss all of the myriad wonderful activities happening at the UN. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But first, President Trump continues to dig a hole, and the hole continues to be dug. And the first rule of holes, of course, is to stop digging. Well, yesterday, President Trump sort of went back and forth on these Ukraine allegations. So, just to review, to bring you up to date when last we left our riveting story on this episode of Downton Abbey, the President of the United States had a call with Ukraine. The call with Ukraine involved the president asking the government of Ukraine to look into investigating and prosecuting Hunter Biden and or Joe Biden for a relationship that Hunter Biden had in 2016 with a company called Burisma, which is an oil and gas company in Ukraine. And let's be frank about this. The only reason Hunter Biden had this slot at Burisma is because his daddy is Joe Biden, because Hunter Biden has never actually earned a job. And just a few months earlier, he had been kicked out of the Navy for drug use. I mean, there had been serious problems with Hunter Biden, and yet he was getting these very rich jobs. Okay, so he gets this job over at Burisma, and the prosecutor, there's a prosecutor named Shokin over in Ukraine, he starts looking into this. It turns out this guy Shokin also had a significant record of corruption. So Joe Biden, who's vice president at the time, is openly calling on the government of Ukraine to fire this prosecutor. Now, the question is, was he calling on Ukraine to fire the prosecutor because the prosecutor was looking into the corporation where his son was? Or was Biden doing that because, in general, that prosecutor was corrupt? Now, Biden maintains the latter. And he was openly bragging about pressuring Ukraine by threatening to withhold American aid to Ukraine, $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, in fact. So that is what set President Trump off. President Trump always wants everybody investigated, as we mentioned yesterday on the program. This is his thing. Right? Every other tweet from President Trump is about how someone should investigate Netflix for the Obama deal. Someone should investigate Saturday Night Live for the FCC. Somebody should investigate my underwear. President Trump constantly wants investigations of people. And so him getting on the line with someone being like, can you investigate something? That's not necessarily a violation of law. It's just the president being the president, which is not good. You don't want the president of the United States talking to foreign leaders and asking them to investigate American citizens as a general rule. But it's also a manner of degree rather than a difference in kind with past activities by prominent politicians. As we've mentioned over the past week, in 2016, Hillary Clinton explicitly worked with the Ukrainian government. The DNC explicitly worked with the Ukrainian government at the Ukrainian embassy to try and dig up dirt on Paul Manafort, who was then Donald Trump's campaign manager, because Manafort was allegedly working with the Russians and with the former Ukrainian regime of Viktor Yanukovych. Right, so that was Hillary Clinton engaging in that sort of politics. Barack Obama, in the lead up to 2012, was caught on a hot mic telling Dmitry Medvedev, who was a front man for Vladimir Putin, that he was going to offer Putin and Russia flexibility in exchange for Russia sort of backing off before the election. So Trump saying to Ukraine, it'd be great if you could investigate Biden. It's a difference in degree, not a difference in kind. Now, what would make it a difference in kind is if this was connected to taxpayer dollars, meaning that if Donald Trump had said to Ukraine, I'm withholding your military aid unless you investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, that would be an impeachable offense. That would be a crime. It would be bribery. Okay, it would look a lot like what Trump is accusing Biden of, because Trump is accusing Biden of essentially trying to bribe the government of Ukraine to get rid of a prosecutor looking into his son. Now, in that particular case, Biden has claimed, and the evidence seems to be on his side, that Shokin, the prosecutor, was deeply corrupt, that he was ousted for corruption, and that the fact that this prosecutor was looking into Biden's son was sort of just coincidental. And that may make you suspicious, but the fact is that when you have a lot of interlocking parts and when you have a son who's working internationally in politics and using your name to get around, there are going to be some conflicts of interest, or at least apparent conflicts of interest. So Biden's claim looks a lot like Trump's claim today. So Trump is saying, listen, now I had withheld Ukrainian aid, but the reason I was holding the Ukrainian aid is because I was in general concerned about corruption in Ukraine. And then finally, those fears were quelled. And then I gave the aid, but it didn't have to do specifically with them investigating Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Now, the case in favor of that is that Ukraine did not investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, and Trump unlocked the aid. And he unlocked the aid before any of this story broke. So if it was an explicit quid pro quo, or even an implicit quid pro quo, you would expect that Trump would not have released the aid. So that is going to be his defense here. But the fact that the aid was being discussed at the same time that Trump was pressing the Ukrainian president to investigate his chief political opponent domestically, that is leading to a lot of, I think, well-founded suspicions. Just as the right is suspicious that Joe Biden was using his leverage in order to knock off a prosecutor in Ukraine in favor of his son, the left is suspicious for exactly the same reasons that Trump was threatening to withhold military aid from Ukraine in pursuit of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. So it's almost exactly parallel, like really almost exactly parallel. So the AP reported yesterday, President Donald Trump ordered his staff to freeze nearly $400 million in aid to Ukraine a few days before a phone call in which he pressured the Eastern European nation's leader to investigate the family of political rival Joe Biden, a revelation that comes as more Democrats move toward impeachment proceedings. Now, people are going to look at the timing here, and they're going to say the timing is really suspicious. And the timing is suspicious. I'm not going to sugarcoat the facts. Of course it's suspicious if the president says, let's withhold aid to Ukraine, and then he gets on the line with Ukraine, and the first thing he says is, can you investigate my political opponent, guys? But the fact is that Ukraine probably was not top of mind for Trump, right? If you're his defense lawyer, what you're going to argue is Ukraine, like, you think Trump walks around thinking about Ukraine all day? And the fact is that probably somebody came to him and said, should we give aid to Ukraine? And he was like, nah, I'm not. Let's wait to see if they're corrupt. And then on the phone call, he just does what Trump does, right? He just freewheels and he talks about Biden and all this stuff. And then, without getting any commitment from the Ukrainians to go after Biden or Hunter Biden, then he releases the aid. So if there's a quid pro quo, then where's the quo? Right? If the idea is that he is giving them aid in exchange for X, where is the X? Because the X never materialized. We'll get to more of this in just 1 second. First, let's talk about why you need a great suit. So you think you're going to go down to the local department store and just pick something off the rack, look good, walk out, feel good about yourself. There's only one problem. You get something off the rack, it ain't going to fit you right. What you really need is a custom tailored suit made just for you. And this is where Indochino comes in. They really are fantastic. I've gone down to one of their shops in Santa Monica, and it really is terrific. I mean, they personalize every aspect. They've got a tailor who's working personally with you to handcraft the suit, basically. They allow you to pick all of your customizations. You can pick what your lapels look like. You can get a monogram. You can pick the buttons. You can pick the material, exterior and interior. It really is fantastic. Indochino is the world's largest made-to-measure menswear brand. They make suits, shirts, coats, and more, and everything is made to your exact measurements for a fantastic fit. You get to personalize all the details, including lapel lining, putting on your own monogram. Indochino has hundreds of suit options for all occasions, including work, formal events, even your own wedding. The best part, they're affordable. Almost all their custom clothing is under $400. The process is simple, as I say. You can either do it online or go down to one of their shops. You can take your own measurements at home, do it online, and they will send the customized suit directly back to you. Start your style upgrade now with $30 off your total purchase of $399 or more at Indochino.com when you enter Shapiro at checkout. Spectacular deal. Plus shipping is free. That is Indochino.com. Promo code Shapiro for $30 off your total purchase of $399 or more. An incredible deal for made-to-measure clothing. You really don't have an excuse to wear clothing that doesn't fit. Go check them out. Indochino.com and enter Shapiro at checkout for the special deal. Okay, so the AP reports that Trump, in remarks to reporters at the UN on Tuesday, confirmed that he held up the aid, but he said he did so to fight corruption and urge European nations to share in helping out Ukraine. He said, as far as withholding funds, those funds were paid. They're fully paid. Okay, that's true. He says, my complaint has always been, and I'd withhold it again, and I'll continue to withhold until such time as Europe and other nations contribute to Ukraine. Now, that obviously does fit with Trump's broader overall pattern of saying things like people aren't paying their fair share in NATO, and so we might withhold aid until NATO nations start paying more for their own defense. He suggested that Germany and France put in money. And then he used the moment to again suggest the Biden family inappropriately benefited from their ties to Ukraine. So President Trump, he went off on the press over all of this. He was over at the United Nations, and he took the time to rip into not Fredo, Chris Cuomo on CNN for his coverage.
I don't watch CNN because it's fake news, but I watched Rudy take apart Fredo. Fredo's performance was incompetent. Rudy took him apart. The press doesn't give him credit because they take little tiny snippets where wherever Rudy was a little bit, if he mispronounces a word, they'll show that. They won't show the whole. Rudy Giuliani took Fredo to the cleaners.
And he's talking about the exchange between Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer, and not Fredo. We won't call him Fredo, apparently. It's a racial slur. Not Fredo, Chris Cuomo, over on CNN, in exchange in which Rudy Giuliani sort of reversed himself and admitted within 30 seconds that that Trump had actually spoken with the Ukrainian president about the possible prosecution of Joe Biden. So a little bit more information on this withholding aid issue, because, again, The quid pro quo is the criminal question here. So according to the Washington Post, President Trump, and this would be Caron Demerjian, Josh Dowsey, Ellen Nakashima, and Carol Leonnig on it. So you can see that they're taking this pretty seriously, putting 4 reporters on the story. President Trump told his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to hold back almost $400 million in military aid for Ukraine, at least a week before a phone call in which Trump is said to have pressured the Ukrainian president to investigate the son of former VP Joe Biden, according to 3 senior administration officials. Officials at the Office of Management and Budget relayed Trump's order to the State Department and the Pentagon during an interagency meeting in mid-July. According to officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations, they explained that the president had concerns and wanted to analyze whether the money needed to be spent at all. Administration officials were instructed to tell lawmakers the delays were part of an interagency process, but give them no additional information, a pattern that continued for nearly 2 months until the White House released the funds on the night of September 11th. Okay, so now the Washington Post is reporting something that looks that they're trying to portray this as a cover-up, right? I mean, that is obviously what they're saying. That they're trying to say it wasn't solely up to Trump, it was an interagency process and all the rest, which would be suspicious. I mean, frankly, if the president was saying, I want to withhold the aid, but let's call it an interagency process, like that would be bad. Right? All of this would be bad. Trump's order to withhold aid to Ukraine a week before his July 25th call with Zelensky is likely to raise questions about the motivation for his decision and fuel suspicions on Capitol Hill that Trump sought to leverage congressionally approved aid to damage a political rival. Now, Kellyanne Conway, spokesperson for the White House, she was on TV this morning and she confirmed that President Trump did withhold the money from Ukraine, but she maintains that it had to do with generalized corruption in Ukraine and not having to do with exerting leverage over Ukraine to go after Biden.
The Washington Post broke a story yesterday afternoon that said that the president told Mick Mulvaney to hold the money, $391 million in Ukrainian military aid, before he talked to the president, the new president of Ukraine. Is that how you believe it all happened?
Yes, the president, in terms of the president, wanted to talk to him first, make sure that this person, the new president who won in the landslide on the anti-corruption agenda, was actually going to execute on that and keep the promises of his presidential elective platform.
Okay, well, the left is going to say, well, and the way that Trump achieved his confirmation that this was an anti-corruption platform is by getting Zelensky to pledge to prosecute Biden. But Zelensky didn't do that. So here's the problem with that particular narrative, at least so far as we know, given the information. The Ukrainian president has completely denied that he gave Trump the okay. So in other words, he never said to Trump, according to the Ukrainian president Zelensky, that he was going to prosecute Biden. So if the logic is Trump withholds aid for a week, and then he has a call with Zelensky to determine whether he is anti-corruption, but secretly to determine whether he'll go after Biden. And then he says, I want to make sure you're not corrupt, but in order for me to determine that, are you prosecuting by any chance Joe Biden? And then Zelensky says yes, and then Trump releases the aid. That looks like a quid pro quo. But apparently Zelensky said no. Apparently Zelensky was like, no, Mr. President, no. And Trump was like, okay, well, I guess you're not corrupt. Here's the money. So that doesn't look exactly like the kind of quid pro quo that we are talking about. Again, I'm just operating off the evidence that I've been given. If the evidence changes, then I will change my opinion. But that's the evidence that is in place right now. Republican senators on the Senate Appropriations Committee said September 12th that the aid to Ukraine had been held up while the Trump administration explored whether Zelensky, the country's new president, was pro-Russian or pro-Western. They said the White House decided to release the aid after Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois threatened to freeze $5 billion in Pentagon funding for next year unless the money for 2019 was distributed. Okay, so now what Democrats are going to claim is that Trump didn't actually want to release the aid, that he wanted to continue holding it over Ukraine, and it was only Dick Durbin threatening a larger funding freeze for the Pentagon that caused Trump to let it go. Okay. In other words, there are 2 plausible narratives. Okay, and we don't know the answer to this yet, which is why I'm sure there will be a congressional investigation, and frankly, there should be. Frankly, there should be. I, as an American, want more information on what happened here. I do not want the President of the United States of either party threatening to withhold aid to countries based on them investigating domestic political opponents. Okay, that would be wrong. It would be impeachable. It would be a crime. But we don't know that happened yet. And as I say, there are 2 alternative versions of the timeline being presented. The timeline presented by the Trump administration says we are considering Ukrainian aid. Trump spoke to Zelensky. Zelensky made no guarantee that he would go after Biden, and in fact didn't say that he would go after Biden. In fact, he said he wouldn't, presumably. And then we released the aid. So that's not a quid pro quo. And on the left, they would say, well, the only reason you released the aid is you did so in spite of the fact that you didn't want to. You wanted to hold it over Zelensky, but Dick Durbin made trouble for you, and so you decided to release the aid. One senior administration official said Monday that Trump's decision to hold back the funds was based on his concerns about there being a lot of corruption in Ukraine. and that the determination to release the money was motivated by the fiscal year's looming close on September 30th. So the Trump administration making an alternative case. We didn't do it because of Dick Durbin. It's because all of the money has to be released by September 30th. We had to give it an up or a down, and so we gave it an up. There was concern within the administration that if they did not spend the money, they would run afoul of the law, the official said, noting that eventually Trump did give the OMB's acting director, Russell Vought, permission to release the money. The official emphatically denied there was any link between blocking the aid and pressing Zelensky into investigating the Bidens, stating it had nothing to do with a quid pro quo. Well, that is the key line. So the actual source for the Washington Post, or at least one of their key sources, is openly saying this was not a quid pro quo. But Democrats are pushing forward anyway. Now, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, he is, obviously pushing back with the narrative that the Trump administration is providing him. And listen, he should know, and McConnell obviously should know something about the spending of this money, considering that the Senate did have over